Only 60 years ago, Korea was a war-torn country. Since then, Korea has managed the improbable. It has risen from the ashes of war and poverty to become a modern and economically thriving nation, a feat unseen before. Korea became a member of both the OECD and the DAC, and hosted the G20 summit in 2010. Also, the 2018 Winter Olympics will be held in Pyeongchang, Korea. Driven by rapid growth in exports over the last 50 years, Korea's world trade totaled $1 trillion in 2011. Korea's miraculous economic ascent, now the 11th largest economy, has captured the imagination of the world.
50 years ago, this country was a poor, war-ravaged country, dependent on foreign assistance. Today, it leads the OECD in education, in digital knowledge, in green growth initiatives.
You are the bridge between the least developed countries and the more developed countries.
Korea have proved to be very, very successful because, as we all understand, Korea have limited resources. They don't have much natural resources. So what they did is just to use what they have so as to transform it to a more productive way so that they can be shared by the whole society.
Korea wants to share its miracle with the rest of the world. Korea's dramatic social and economic transformation is lasting proof that miracles can happen. Miracle on the Han River. In 1945, Korea became an independent country after 35 years of oppressive colonial rule. Celebrations of the nation's newfound independence and freedom soon gave way to the stark realities of a poor country that depended on humanitarian aid just to survive. The desperate situation only got worse as civil war broke out on the Korean peninsula in 1950. Nearly 1.5 million civilian lives were lost. Over half of the country's buildings and physical infrastructure was destroyed during the Korean War.
산에가 솔로몬비가 송기비께 와가 그 송기산 죽기를 먹고 보살파라가 아사가 죽기를 먹고 그때 그 시절에 진짜 곤란 많이 했거든 아들 키울 때.
Korea received huge amounts of foreign aid. At one point, foreign aid accounted for nearly 50% of the national budget. Despite the many good foreign aid contributed in rebuilding Korea, its effects were not all positive.
국민 의식 구조랄까, 생활 습관, 관습 이런 면에서 이 원주가 아주 나쁜 영향을 미쳤단 말이에요. 예컨대 이제 이런 겁니다. 우리나라 사람들이 이제 굉장히 공짜를 좋아하잖아요. 공짜면 양자물도 뭐 마신다 그럴 정도로. 그것도 이제 원자물자가 들어온 바람에 그걸 분배하고 소비하고 하는 과정에서 우리나라 사람들이 야 손에다가 흙 묻히고 뭐 피땀나게 일할 필요 없다.
Drastic and fundamental change was needed to get the nation on a path toward sustainable development. The impetus for this change was powerful and innovative policies. Land reform based on the land to the tillers and market-oriented principle was the most important government policy. It was carried out during the war. Land reform was executed in a purchase and distribution of land at the market price. The government purchased land from landlords by issuing land securities, and farmers paid for the land in kind by installments. This was in direct opposite to North Korea's approach of confiscation and distribution of land without payment. Land reform provided the chance for farmers, which made up 75% of the Korean population, to farm on their own land, and being given the right of ownership was another big change.
야, 이제 네가 노력하는 만큼 여기서 나온다. 생산물이 나오고 그건 다 네 소유다. 그러니까 열심히 농사를 짓고 열심히 거기서 부를 창출해가지고 더 자기를 갖다 이제 뭐 신분 상승도 할 수 있고 부자가 될 수도 있고 하는 거니까 그런 걸 이렇게 부여해 줬다고 하는 거. 그게 저는 그 우리 한국 경제 발전이나 우리 사회 전체적인 발전에 대단히 큰 역사적 그 어떤 계기가 됐다고 보는 거죠.
The increase of agricultural production narrowed the gap between urban and rural areas and vitalized the economy. It was linked to the foundation of the market economy. That's how Korea entered the age of capitalism. The government wanted to change people's mindset and values, instill a new work ethos. Nothing would be free. Everyone had to work hard. People were asked to work for food under government-led public works projects. They were paid with wheat flour given by the U.S., or better known as PL-480. The policy of no such thing as a free lunch showed the will of the government and the willingness of the Korean people to change and empower themselves. Nearly 21 million people participated in the land reclamation and reforestation program led by the government. Over 10 billion trees were planted within 30 years, bringing Korea's once desolate landscape back to life. South Korea had become barren of trees after years of overforestation and war. It was a remarkable achievement. The opportunity to make a living, to be rewarded for their hard work, helped to establish a new set of values that would serve South Korea well during its rapid development. Koreans, perhaps more than anyone in the world, understand the value and importance of hard work and a good education. In 1950, incredibly, only less than a quarter of adults could read and write. An all-out war was waged against illiteracy. In 1954, the first campaign of the war was launched by making primary education compulsory.
초등 6년 동안 가장 아동 발달 기록은 가장 중요한 시기에 핵심이 되는 지식과 기술, 태도를 다 초등교육을 통해서 이제 완성합니다. 그리고 특히 중요한 것은 여자아이들, 여성도 초등교육을 다 받게 이렇게 됐습니다. 그리고 초등교육을 이렇게 국가가 의무화하고 국가가 강력히 지원함으로 해가지고 잘 사는 집안, 소위 말하는 사회 경제적인 가정 배경이 초등교육의 이수 여부에 큰 영향을 미치지 않았습니다.
After 1945, enrollment in primary schools grew rapidly. In less than one decade, Korea achieved an enrollment rate of 83% in primary education. By 1959, primary education was within reach of everyone. The war on illiteracy was waged in community centers scattered across the country. Millions of adults learned to read and write in civic schools with U.S. assistance. Education among adults was made compulsory. Adults without a basic education in reading and writing had to attend over 200 hours of class instruction over a period of 70 days. In 5 short years, the illiteracy rate among adults fell to just 22%, an unprecedented achievement. A generation of young adults had been educated, the future backbone of Korea's industrialization.
사람입니다. 자원이 있거나 없거나 사람이 중요합니다. 어떤 능력과 어떠한 태도와 어떠한 의지를 가졌는가, 사람이 중요하죠. 그러한 개인들이 모인 집합체로서의 국민이 중요하고요. 그러니까 사람을 만드는 것은 교육이고.
Another war was being waged. It was a campaign to root out deep-seated corruption within the government and in business. The establishment of the National Tax Service, Korea's first national tax authority, was symbolic of the government's efforts to reform itself, to tackle corruption, and to improve public services. The effects of the reform efforts were almost immediate. The increase in tax revenues provided critical fiscal resources and allowed Korea to become self-sustainable. Unable to escape the onslaught of the Asian financial crisis in 1997, Korea was brought to the brink of an economic and financial catastrophe. During the dark days of the crisis, a silver of light came would shine on Korea. Long forgotten, the Women's Semaul Association rallied their communities, asking people to donate any gold they had to help in one of Korea's darkest hours. What began in Korea's rural countryside sparked a nationwide movement to collect every ounce of gold the country could muster. Nearly 227 tons of gold were collected. The Semaul movement was more than a social program to improve rural life. It had helped to weave the basic principles of self-help and cooperation into the fabric of Korean society, traces of which can still be found today. The incredible real-life stories of villages coming together as one community, mobilizing their resources to make for a better life, have captured the imagination of the world.
And before Semaul came, most people thought we have to be helped so that we can do something. But as they taught us, they said that we can help ourselves. We can start with something little.
How can the Semaul movement contribute to rural development in developing countries? What are the conditions and the key factors for its success? With the government bringing to bear all of its resources, the Semaul movement was a movement to mobilize communities and to empower its people. For the movement to naturally take root, it had to be voluntary.
우리 농촌 근대화에 있어서 아주 중요한 3가지 요소를 통합한 한국적인 농촌 개발 모델이라고 할 수 있습니다. 우선 먼저 농민들의 자율적 참여에 동기를 부여하는 정부의 자재 지원, 그리고 그 다음에 그 자재 지원을 받아서 농민들이 근면자조 협동을 실천하면서 우리도 할 수 있다는 자신감과 그 결과로 얻어지는 의식개혁. 이 2가지의 사업 성과로서 농촌의 인프라 개선 그리고 소득 증대, 이 크게 봐서 이 3가지 요소를 잘 연결시킨 통합적인 농촌 근대화 운동이었다고 얘기할 수 있습니다.
In 1971, nearly 35,000 villages all over Korea were given free bags of cement with a message that the cement had to be used for the good of all village members. With a mountain of cement bags delivered at their doorsteps, village members came together and decided on how best to use the cement. Collective action and cooperation was the order of the day.
지는 데도 있고 또 샴푸올맨들이야 거기 그흙안 묻고 하는 게 좋겠다 하는 데도 있고 또 우리 마을 같은 데는 뭐 그런 것이 그렇다니 부뚜막 하는 데 좋겠다 이래서 이제 부뚜막들도 하고 그러면 불악별로 좀 닮습니다.
The question lingering on everyone's mind was how the villages would respond to the challenge. A survey was taken to see how the villages responded. They were basically categorized based on their performance. Villages that used the cement in a cooperative and productive way were given high marks, while villages that didn't were given low marks. After the first year of the Semar movement, the government struggled with a dilemma. What would be done about the villages that failed to cooperate and help themselves? Would the same support be given to these villages? In the end, the government didn't waver. It stuck to the principles of Semaur and only rewarded villages that delivered results. Only self-reliant and cooperative villages were rewarded with additional resources like cement, steel, and electricity. The message was heard loud and clear. Only hard work and collective action would be rewarded. The principle of rewarding hard work was at the heart of the Semaur movement. The idea that if you worked hard, you would also be rewarded for it motivated people to want to work harder. Once people began to believe, more and more people bought into the Semaur movement. At the start of the Semaur movement, only about half of the villages took part. But by the third year, all but a handful of villages took part. The benefits of the Semaur movement far outweighed its cost, almost 7 times the cost.
If Semalondong had only been using cement to build a road or a building or a bridge, it would not have led to higher incomes. This massive investment combined with mobilizing the local population to do a lot of things in their own villages together is the Semalondong. And one without the other would not work.
The government's differential support provided the motivation to improve infrastructure in rural areas. The motivated people cooperated and participated voluntarily. It improved their quality of life and the facilities of their village. Ultimately, it built self-help and the cooperative spirit in people's minds. That's how the so-called Semaur method made a virtuous cycle of the Semaur movement. The Semaur movement was about collective action, holding each other accountable through cooperation. Traditional forms of social associations and networks like cooperatives that allowed village members to work together have long existed and been an important part of Korean society. The successful farmland reform in the 1950s helped most farmers own their land. Perceiving themselves as an economic unit, they have actively participated in cooperative work. The Semaur movement changed the entire makeup of the Korean village life, one that for generations relied on primitive livelihoods.
초가집도 없애고 마을길도 넓히고 70년 전부터 새마을운동이
우리가 땅 그 100평, 200평 내놨다고 우리가 농사지어서 못 산 건 아니다. 그걸 내놓음으로 인해서 우리 농사가 이렇게 쉬워지고 반듯하고 외지 사람들이 우리 도곡리 사람들을 누가 사람 취급해 줬느냐. 그러니까 내 밭부터 그냥 가서 뚝 잘라서 이거 밭을 만들자.
Once people began to make donations, it got other people to also donate land, creating a virtuous cycle. It fundamentally changed the way people used to think about themselves and their neighbors. The Semaur movement was a national movement on a grand scale involving over 26,000 villages across the country. It also gave women a chance to get involved and make a difference. Many women, like Moon Ja-jung, did make a difference.
능력이 있어야 돼요. 그래가지고 미치한다는 게요. 저는 미쳤다 소리를 한두 번 들은 사람이 아니에요. 다 저를 만난 사람은 그때 난 다 미쳤다 했어.
Female Semaul movement leaders worked to correct male villagers' bad habits of drinking and gambling all the time. For many, being a Semaul leader was a badge of honor given by the community. The leaders were looked upon for leadership. They had to lead by example. They had to help resolve issues and bring people together, not just plan and carry out projects. Above all, Semaul leaders had to be selfless, put the community's interests ahead of their own. They received no pay for their work. It was their badge of honor to carry for their community. It was the dedication and passion of the leaders that gave life to the movement.
It raised up farmers as heroes of Korea and of Korean development. So on the one hand, you had the export companies, which were getting awards for being heroes. And what President Park did is said, okay, also the farmers, they are heroes. So instead of being a lowly job, it was given a lot of prestige. And that's another factor, I think, that
The Semaul movement was also about giving farmers economic opportunities to make a better living.
그 원자재는 공장이 위치한 인근에서 조달한다는 것을 원칙으로 하고 있습니다. 아주 특징적인 거예요. 그건 무슨 얘기냐면은 그 공장에 나는 그 천연 자원들을 부가가치를 높여서 외부에 팔겠다.
The Semaul factory program supported factories that performed well. The government provided a site and cultivated markets for them. Also, factories with good performance were given subsidies and tax benefits. The Semaul movement spread like wildfire, reaching urban centers, factories, and schools. By 1975, the income gap between rural areas and urban areas had been narrowed. Korea's development became broad-based. The social and economic benefits of the Semaul movement to Korean society were immeasurable. It changed the way people thought about themselves and their communities. People learned the values of being rewarded for hard work, the importance of trust and cooperation. In the 1960s, the future of the Korean economy and its people was anything but bright. Early in its development, Korea was dependent on aid, barely able to export anything. As such, countries are left with increasing exports or decreasing imports to manage the trade balance. But in reality, Korea had nothing to export. The only thing Korea could export at the time were wigs made of real human hair. By the 1990s, Korea's economy was thriving, running on all cylinders, exporting $100 billion in goods a year. At the center of Korea's industrialization was the heavy and chemical industries. What is the process of rapid and compressed economic development? The first 5-year economic development plan was a manifesto for self-sustainable economic development and industrialization, focused on key export-based manufacturing industries. To guide this strategy, a super ministry with power over nations' economics planning and budgeting was created, the Economic Planning Board. But how would a poor country with no credit standing with international lenders and anemic export base secure the foreign capital to carry out this audacious plan? Early attempts by Korea's industrialists and even the government to secure capital were rebuffed. international lenders were not willing to take a risk on Korea.
오 리스크 컨트리, 전쟁 위험 국가라고 그래가지고 어떤 나라도 전쟁 위험 국가에는 돈을 꿔주는 법이 없습니다. 그래서 꿀 수가 없었어요.
Down but not out, Korea shifted gears. It began to industrialize the only way it knew how, by capitalizing on its only comparative advantage, a healthy and educated labor force. Industrialization began with the light industries. While many other developing countries focused on an import substitution development strategy, Korea opened its economy to trade and exports. Local governors played a key role in growing the export business at small and medium-sized companies. Korean ambassadors abroad also helped to meet export targets. By 1964, Korea achieved $100 million in trade. Exports grew at a rapid rate of 40% in 1 year. November 30th was declared as the Day of Exports, and exceptional exporting companies were recognized and rewarded. Exports continued to grow at a rapid rate, increasing 40% every year.
기업가들은 3억 불 도저히 안 된다. 3억 불 한다는 것은 비행기가 음속 돌파를 하는 것 같이 힘드니까 못하겠습니다 하고 뻗쳤댔어요. 근데 실제로 해보니까 됐단 말이에요, 3억 불이.
As it achieved $300 million in exports, Korea had achieved economic takeoff according to U.S. economist W.W. Rostow. Korea had made a critical turn in its economic development. The export-driven policies were based on monitoring and evaluation, which was made possible by the monthly export promotion meetings. The monthly export promotion meetings chaired by President Park brought hundreds of industrialists, financiers, policymakers, bureaucrats, and media members together in one room.
every 수출을 진흥시키기 위해서는 어떤 얘기, 어떤 조그만 얘기, 어떤 한 얘기도 다 얘기할 수 있어요.
이 수출이 여하튼간에 잘 되고 또 문제가 있는 것도 또 해결해 줬고 말이죠. 대한민국만 있는 그런 수출 시스템이 있습니다.
For 15 years, the monthly export promotion meetings gave the decision makers a forum to monitor industrial performance, to discuss economic and business issues, and to deliver decisions quickly. It was an information sharing machine. By the 1970s, policy focus quickly shifted from the light industries to the development of capital and technology-intensive heavy and chemical industries like petrochemicals, steel, and auto. The government established a long-term strategy for industrialization in the 1980s and set an export target of $10 billion by developing the heavy and chemical industries.
옛날에 우리가 아이샤스가 수출할 때 미국에 가보시면은 한다스가 길바닥에 놓여 있어요. 이게 경업 제품의 가치입니다. 그러니까 이 이상의 도약을 하기 위해서는 중화업 쪽으로 가야 되겠다.
The words of U.S. President Richard Nixon, doctrinated in the 1970s, essentially asked its Asian allies to militarily defend themselves. Soon after, the partial drawdown of U.S. military forces stationed in Korea sent shockwaves throughout the region and the Korean peninsula. From then on, Korea had a new mission: development of a heavy industries, one of which was a military defense industry. Massive resources were poured into developing strategic heavy industries that would serve as the pillars of Korea's industrialization, including the steel, auto, shipbuilding, chemical, and machinery industries. Large-scale industrial complexes were constructed.
정부와 지정하는 입지에 들어간다 이렇게 됐어요. 그래서 용수, 전기, 도로, 사회간접시설이죠. 그리고 철도, 항만 이건 다 정부가 해주고 민간 기업처럼 들어가서 공장만 지어라 이렇게 된 거예요.
The centerpiece of Korea's industrialization was the steel industry. But international lenders were skeptical of Korea's plans to build a steel industry. Many developing countries had tried before, only to fail. Korea knocked on the doors of foreign lenders, but no one answered. Korea would find another way to build the steel industry, using some of the Economic Cooperation Fund established after relations with Japan were normalized. Construction on a modern steel mill began. 3 years after breaking ground, the first of the steel mills that would later become POSCO was built in 1973. With $12 million of foreign earnings made in 6 months, POSCO grew rapidly and has been a foundation of Korea's rapid industrialization since the 1970s. By the late 1970s, the heavy industries accounted for over 50% of Korea's $10 billion trade in exports. During the 1980s, Korea's heavy industries were restructured. Despite criticisms, the heavy industries continued to grow more than 10% per year. The 1990s marked the arrival of Korea as an industrialized and modern nation. Trade and exports grew to $100 billion. The Korean government formulated a development strategy based on the pyramid structure during the early stages of economic development. This differentiated development strategy focused on first promoting upstream industries that produce finished goods and then to industries that produced raw materials. In the early stages, Korea produced and exported finished goods that were not capital or technology intensive, industries that formed the base of the pyramid. Once enough technology was accumulated, Korea began exporting high value-added heavy and chemical industry products, industries that formed the top of the pyramid. As Korea exported high-quality, globally competitive products, the development of leading export-based industries was successfully achieved. Besides the investment in plants, roads, harbors, the investments in human capital played a decisive role in Korea's industrialization. Skilled workers were the bedrock of Korea's industrialization. Vocational high schools were developed to feed Korea's industrialization with a skilled workforce able to work with precision and complex machinery.
최우수 시설이었습니다. 첨단 시설이었고요. 정부 기관이나 은행에도 없는 슈퍼컴퓨터가 설치가 됐었고, 모든 공작 실습 시설은 CNC 선반이라든지 이러한 컴퓨터화 돼 있는 기계들이 설치가 됐습니다. 그래서 비근한 예로 서울대, 충남대, 경북대 이런 공대에 다니는 학생들이 방학 기간에 와서 그 장비를 가지고 실습을 해보는.
Students' tuitions, books, room, and board were all paid for by the government. Only the best and the brightest were trained at the schools.
Reinforcement of the value of education, traditionally, but added to that, as development began, jobs were created, and those who were able to advance in education were rewarded with good jobs.
Korea's rapid industrialization is testament to the importance put on building a skilled and competitive workforce and the dedication and hard work of the young men and women of that generation, the flag bearers of Korea's modernization. The first Korean to win gold in the International Skill Olympics was in 1977, and since then, Korea has won the gold 17 times. Many of the government-sponsored vocational graduates became national and hometown heroes.
어깨에다가 조국 근대화의 기술하는 견장을 붙여줬어요. 기술을 배우는 학생들이나 공업고등학교나 직업훈련원 이런 데 다니는 학생들한테. 그러니까 이 사람들은 아무것도 아닌 자그마한 태그 하나지만 조국 근대화의 기수가 된다는 자부심에 굉장히 노력을 많이 했죠.
Government support was also provided to talented and motivated researchers. KIST contributed greatly to the advancement of technology and scientific knowledge in Korea. KIST, under the strong leadership of the government, upgraded the level of technology in Korea. Korea's young, talented, and skilled and knowledge-driven workforce were the engines of Korea's industrialization. Goldstar A501, the first Korean vacuum tube radio, was made on November 15, 1959. It was a very significant moment in Korean engineering history. American-made radios, considered the best at the time, were expensive. Most Koreans could not afford them. There was a budding entrepreneurial spirit at the time, even though Korea lacked the technology and know-how. People went abroad to learn about new technologies and how to make things. If that didn't work, engineers and experts were brought to Korea. Goldstar, the forerunner to LG, hired a group of small shopkeepers who also repaired electronic appliances and began to build radios. With no capital, Goldstar had to build a lot of the components from scratch instead of importing them. It took Goldstar and its engineers only a year to build a radio. In 1962, the first radios made in Korea were exported to the US. It was a momentous event. It gave Korean businesses the confidence it needed to take on bigger and riskier ventures. The radio was just the beginning, the seeds of what would grow to become leading global industries. Under the principle of differential support based on performances, companies with considerable amount of export could access more benefits and resources.
뭐 해방 후 쭉 그저 물가가 뛰고 말이죠. 또 자금 수요가 많고 하니까 은행에서 이 마음대로 그렇게 융자를 받기가 어렵거든요. 꼭 담보 챙기고 말이죠. 근데 이 무역 수출에 관해서만은 한국은행 금융통화위원회에서 아주 단단히 결의를 해가지고 이 지금 그 수출 신용장만 오면은 일정 비율의 그냥 융자금을 갖다가 담보 없이 그냥 그 다음 날쯤 돈 내보냅니다. 네.
경제적으로 보다 많은 성과를 내는 경제 주체를 더 많이 지원하고 그런 경제 주체가 더 잘 되도록 격려하는 것이 시장의 역할입니다. 바로 시장은 이와 같이 잘하는 경제 주체를 앞장서고 더 지원함으로써 이걸 통해서 동기부여를 하고 이걸 통해서 경제 발전을 일으키는 것입니다.
The policy of rewarding performance based on differentiated government support was critical in growing exports and in driving industrialization. The policy of rewarding performance was introduced in the 1970s with the establishment of the General Trading Company. The idea was to focus policy support on a few select companies that perform well by growing exports rather than any one product. The trading companies helped to market and export a wide range of goods produced by Korean companies. Companies put everything they had into growing exports. It started with simple process-oriented and labor-intensive industries, and then it expanded to more value-added technology-driven heavy and chemical industries. This fostered a competitive environment where companies could apply their trade, innovate, and enter new markets. Soon, companies were producing a diverse range of goods and exporting them all over the world. Competition at home and abroad promoted a competitive and entrepreneurial spirit.
기업을 이렇게 해서 잘 살게 하는데 우리가 역할을 해야 된다는 사명감이 있어. 또 할 수 있다는 자신감이 있다. 또 이거는 어떠한 어려움이 있어도 해내고야 말겠다는 어떤 도전 정신이 있다. 그 다음에 네 번째가 중요해요. 같이 잘 살아야 되겠다. 모든 그 기업의 구성원들이 다 잘 살도록 해야 되겠다.
companies that achieved high export figures were recognized on Export Day, which was designated to celebrate Korea's achievement of $100 million in exports. The export performance of companies was ranked and announced, and companies and businessmen with good results were given awards.
그때 1억 불, 2억 불, 3억 불, 4억 불 이제 수출탑을 우리가 받았는데 그 받아왔을 때마다 잔치를 한 번씩 하고 그리고 우리가 어깨가 쭉 피했지. 왜냐하면 애국자거든. 그때 수출을 많이 하는 게 애국자고 많은 사람들이 부러워했다고. 그리고 나라를 위해서 우리가 훌륭한 일을 한다. 그런 자부심이 생겼다.
Export performance became a great standard to determine the success of business and businessmen.
열심히 노력하는 경제 주체가 항상 국가나 사회로부터 대접을 받고 경제계로부터도 대접을 받음으로써 더 열심히 하게 되고 동시에 대접받지 못하는 그런 경제 주체들은 더 분발해서 열심히 하게 만드는 그런 동기부여 기능이 한국 경제정책의 핵심 전략이었다고 생각합니다.
It was no coincidence that the companies that were recognized for their exceptional performance grew to become global leaders in 20 to 30 years. Samsung, which started as a small noodle shop, has become one of the biggest global companies in the world. Hyundai, which started as a small rice store, has become a leader in various industries. Daewoo, which started with just 5 million won worth of capital, has become a leader in Korea. LG, which started as a small toothpaste manufacturing factory, has grown to become a global company with 50 affiliates. SK, which started as a small suit lining manufacturer, has become a global company with 120 trillion won worth of annual sales. A right mix of policies, a budding entrepreneurial spirit, and competition helped to make Korea an industrial powerhouse.
미국의 원조마저 끝나고 어려움에 처한
When job opportunities were few and many were out of work, a generation of Koreans displayed grit and selflessness in the face of adversity. Thousands of miners and nurses went to foreign lands in search of work.
35도, 6도, 심지어는 38도, 내 체온보다도 뜨거운 데서 난 실질적으로 일을 했어요. 그러니까 많이 일을 못하죠. 그러니까 땀이 막 쫙 납니다. 그래서 그냥 물통, 큰 우리 생수통 2개, 3개 녹아서 그냥 물 먹으면서.
봉사는 독일 사람들에게 극찬을 받았으며 동양에서 온 천사라고 불렀고 독일의 언론들은 독일에서 꼭 필요한
The miners and nurses sent their wages back home. The resilient and hard-working Koreans were the backbone of Korea's rapid economic development.
행복하다는 생각을 했어요. 왜냐하면 비록 힘들지만은 일자리가 있다는 거. 그리고 그 일자리를 이겨내면 미래에 희망이 있다는 그런 생각들을.
For their families and their country, these elementary school graduates worked 13 hours a day in the factory and studied at night after work. Because of the support from companies and the government, workers who worked hard during the day and studied at night could form the bedrock of Korea's economic development. Early in its development, it seemed Korea would not be able to rise from the depths of poverty and despair. However, the leadership of the government, ingenuity of the Korean industry, and resilience of the Korean people brought about dramatic change. Only 60 years ago, Korea was a war-torn country. Since then, Korea has managed the improbable. It has risen from the ashes of war and poverty to become a modern and economically thriving nation.
It's an amazing success story which can be replicated. We can all learn from Korea's experience, which combined strong leadership, technical capability, innovation, an exemplary work ethic, a willingness to engage the private sector, and the pursuit of excellence.
Despite different social and political conditions found in various countries, Korea's model of development can provide valuable insights into development. For Korea, a combination of policies, a budding entrepreneurial spirit, and competition help to bring about social and economic transformation. After becoming a member of the OECD Development Assistance Committee in 2009, Korea has transformed itself, going from an aid recipient to a donor country, an unprecedented achievement in recent times. In November 2011, the fourth high-level forum on aid effectiveness was held in Busan, Korea. In Busan, a new global partnership that embraces diversity and cooperation for greater aid effectiveness was launched. Busan, as host of the forum, served as a symbol of Korea's economic miracle and how sharing that miracle can help to contribute in finding solutions for greater development and aid effectiveness.
도움을 받을 때의 심경을 헤아려서 우리가 남을 도울 때는 두 손으로 도움을 드려야 합니다. 도움을 받는 나라가 장차 도움을 주는 나라가 될 수 있다는 희망을 우리가 주어야 합니다.
As South Korea takes up the mantle of a donor country and its newfound role and responsibility in the international community, it wants to share its miracle with the rest of the world. Under its knowledge-sharing program, Korea is sharing its economic development experiences with 30 developing countries across Asia, Africa, and the rest of the world. In a world where there is so much economic uncertainty and where many poor countries have little hope for a better future, Korea's dramatic social and economic transformation is lasting proof that miracles can happen.